So Russell Hornsby, your new movie, The Hate You Give, arrives at a time where I think a lot of us are looking at the world that we live in and wondering where we are right now and how we're going to be able to coexist peacefully in this country. Can you talk just a bit about the timing of this movie and about the sense of urgency that it has, and that I'm assuming that you and everybody involved must have had while making it?
Well, to be honest, I really feel like the time has always been pertinent
Yeah.
for a movie like this. I mean, if you look back, history being a guide as to the where this country has come from historically, and where we are now, not much has changed in the grand scheme of things. So there was always a propitious timing for a film like this with such a narrative. What I do think though now, which changes things a little bit, is that I think young people are a little bit more feeling more empowered, with their willingness and their sense of duty and purpose to speak out. And I think a movie like this at this time gives them a lot more, um, puts a lot more emphasis on speaking out and gives them a little bit more courage of their convictions to stand up and look to be heard.
Well, you're right. I mean, watching the movie, you do get this sense of, we always like to think that things are better now than they were, decades ago or even just years ago. But, I guess there's always, the more things change, the more they stay the same in a sense.
Absolutely, absolutely. So that was the understanding that we had as a cast coming into this film, and we realized that it wasn't we weren't weighed down by the idea of what this country was going through, what the message of the film was. We just knew that as long as we lend our talents and we come prepared to do our best, that will is really all that we need to be able to get this story across and have it be a good story told well.
Talk a little bit about your character, Maverick Carter.
Well, Maverick is an ex-con, was in prison for 3 years, but he's a family man now. He's married with 3 children, and what Maverick is looking to do is to raise his family with as much love and as much guidance and a sense of purpose as he possibly can. Giving his children what he didn't receive, a really strong, firm, loving, guiding hand, and also at the same time wants to be a pillar of his community. And so he's there to really empower his, more importantly, more specifically, his daughter, Star, with a sense of duty and a sense of purpose that says that anything that you think you can do, that you can actually do it.
And that message really gets established right at the very beginning, in the very first scene of the movie. Can you talk a bit about the opening of the film? There's that really powerful speech that you're giving to your children when they're very young.
Yes. The opening scene, the talk, was probably my most challenging scene through the whole film. I think reason being is that I have 2 young boys myself. And so when we sat down to begin to rehearse on the day, I felt overwhelmed and overcome with a sense of emotion that I had never felt before. And I had to just remove myself from the set for about 20 minutes and just purge the hot tears and the emotion that was really overwhelming me at the time, because I realized in that moment that this is a talk that I'm going to have with my children at some point, unfortunately. And much like as being a father and a man, I had to regain and find the strength within me to be not only Russell Hornsby the man, but also Maverick, the character, and be strong for those kids, which is what a lot of parents have to do. But it was a challenge, and I really felt that when we got the tone of that scene, I knew we had a film on our hands.
You bring up the point that, he's somebody who has made mistakes in his past, but he is trying to, make a better life for his children, in a sense, try to have them learn from the mistakes that he made in order to not repeat them. Can you talk just a bit more about that?
Well, what anybody would ever want is a second chance. And he got that second chance. And so I believe while he was incarcerated, and this was part of me, what Russell, as the actor, sort of building the character, sort of wrestled with and reconciled with, is that when you have a second chance, you want to make sure that your children have an opportunity to see the world through a different lens. And I think that was his biggest motivator, is see them enough of the real world, but again, through a different lens that says, you know, you have a different kind of environment around you. You have different kinds of protections and a different kind of love around you that Maverick didn't have. And so in that, you won't need to have a second chance because you're going to make good on your first one. And I think that's important.
Right. There's this really interesting dynamic between you and your wife, played by Regina Hall in the movie. Can you talk a bit about the struggle that the two of them are going through in terms of raising their children?
You know, it's one of those things, again, when you're talking about having children at a young age, you're going to make mistakes. But what Regina and I, as actors, wanted to make sure that what came through was that they loved each other, that they loved their kids. They may not always be on the same accord, but their goals are the same. Their techniques or whatever might not always be in line, but they want the same outcome for their kids, and that is to protect them, to love them, and to make sure that they have every opportunity afforded to them. And so, you know, and again, you realize as parents that if you make a mistake, you want to make sure that as we learn from it, and then so you can guide your kids in a different direction. You know, Regina and I, we really came together and understood that we emulated a lot of how we were raised. You know, the parents that we had, the uncle, the family members, where it was more of a be seen and not heard. We know that we said we raised our house with there's a dictatorship, you know, at home. This is not a democracy, but it's a democracy of there's love in this dictatorship. There is love, yeah. And we will be heard, but it's on our terms until you reach, you know, a point of age where you're, you know, you're worthy or respected enough to be listened to as a young adult, you know. And that's what we call it old school parenting.
No, I know exactly what you mean. My mother was like that too. Yeah. And I mean, that extends to also the way to where the two of you want to have your children raised. I thought it was really interesting. One of the things this movie deals with is with Star's character, how she feels the need to act one way in her neighborhood and one way in the neighborhood where her school is.
Yes.
And I mean, in a sense, we all put on different personas to the people who we're talking to.
Absolutely.
But I thought it was really interesting the way that how this film specifically dealt with that from the perspective of a young Black woman. Can you talk a bit more about that?
Well, you know, Paul Laurence Dunbar says we wear the mask that grins and lies, you know, and, you know, in that, you know, as Star understands, she has to wear that mask. And it's one of those things I believe that it's inherent, you know. I'm sure she watched her mother put the mask on. She's watched her father do it. And she's watched people in her community, you know, have to do it. How do we act when the police come? How did her mother and father, how did they act when they went up to the school to apply? You know what I mean? When you go to the parent-teacher conferences and you say, well, wow, Mom, you're asking interesting questions here. Oh, Dad, you're a little bit more quiet and reserved than you usually are at home. This is interesting that kids start to see these things. And I think it becomes, you know, kids are very, you know, they're bright, kids are smart, and they're very astute. And so they're watching the world around them. They're informed by the behavior and actions of their parents and the elders. And so I think Star realizes that, oh, this is something that I have to do. You know, and it starts with, especially for Black children, I like to think, when you get up there, mind yourself and you listen to people. And I don't want you to, don't speak out of turn. Don't do X, Y, and Z. Don't behave the way you do at home. That's how it starts, you know? And see, the thing is, she says, and you see a glimpse of it on the way in the car on the way to school, when Regina's character, Lisa, says to Sakani, what does your name mean? Joy. Joy. Okay. That's what we want to see. She's telling her son, put that mask on, smile, quietly preparing him for that transitional, as that transitional time in that car when they go to school. It's very interesting what the writer Audrey Wells did in that, in putting that in there like that. That's how it works. And you've done that with all your children.
Yeah.
How are we going to act when we go to school? Are we going to listen to the teacher today? I'm not going to hear any of that back talk that you always give me in the morning. Am I? We're not going to hear about that at school, right? No, Mom. Okay, that's what I want to hear. That's how it starts.
Yeah. There's a particularly harrowing sequence kind of midway through the movie with your character and the police. And I think that really, I mean, it, goes along with this theme of the movie that we have to deal with. Can you talk a little bit about that scene? I mean, was that difficult for you, not just as an actor, but as a human being, to have to put yourself into that situation?
It not as much as you would think it could have been, really. And I think it's actually, in retrospect, I didn't realize how difficult it was looking back at it. At the time, we were just, all the actors, the cast, we were just all on set. We were having a great time between takes. There was a lot of family was around. And then when I watched it, that's when it really startled me, to be honest with you. I think the real effect happened when the scene after that on the lawn, to be truthful.
Yeah.
That's the one that really affected me, because I realized for myself that that Maverick was no longer imparting knowledge to Star. It was Russell imparting knowledge to Amandla and to Lamar and to TJ. And it was more of me saying, and that's why it was held with so much emotion, because I was saying to them, it's your time now. As not only as actors, but as human beings, as people, take this baton with with the energy that you have as young people, and you have to lead the way now. And that it was all that was infused in that moment, So don't be scared. Don't back down. Fight. Know who you are. Understand who you are, and take this baton and run with it. I'll be here to give you some guided wisdom, but take that energy and go and move forward.
Well, how did the director, George Tillman Jr., what did he give you as a director that helped prepare you for those moments to help, get you where you needed to be?
It was interesting. George really we talked prior to a lot. And we just sort of shared all of our experiences as Black men and men of color and whatnot, and what we had been through, what he'd been through in living in Milwaukee growing up, and then living in Chicago, me from Oakland, New York, Boston, all the things that we have had to deal with. And so by the time we got to that moment, there was really nothing to say, to be truthful. It was just more of, let's make sure that we're on the same page emotionally, and the sort of dealing in the same wavelength. And once he knew that and understood that just through conversation. He knew, like, the talk, the moment at the start of the film, and in that moment, I'm going to let Russell Hornsby go. Like it's one of those moments where it says, "This is why I hired you." You know what I mean? So I know who you are as the actor, and we've talked about things. So only thing I can give you is action.
Yeah. We've talked a lot about how your character is passing the baton to your children and emboldening them and empowering them. And, Miss Amandla Stenberg and myself are about of the same generation. Mm-hmm. So certainly, watching this movie, it makes you think to yourself, well, what can we do to help make some progress in this world? I mean, what do you hope young people like Miss Stenberg's age or even younger, take away from this movie?
Well, I hope they take away with what I'm seeing now. It's a sense of empowerment, a willingness to listen, and a willingness to speak out. I think that's really different than how I was raised. That when these kids are informed in such a different way, high literacy, very sophisticated. And so when they see something that's wrong, or they see ill behavior, ill comments, they'll tell you that's wrong. You know, whether you have this Archie Bunker, George Jefferson mentality or thought process or whatever, some old school way, they'll say, Mom, Dad, Uncle, Aunt, that's not right. And that's what we need. Because, you know, all too often, as elder statesmen, as other people, we stay silent. We stay dormant. We say, no, that's so-and-so, you can't change their ways. But when you're willing to speak truth to power in that moment, it startles people, puts them back on their heels. And then they're forced to say, wow, you're right. I'm sorry. My apologies. And what else do people do? People start to look around and they take the temperature of the room. And they say, they look to their wife, they look to their brother or sister, and everybody's looking at them sheepishly like, yeah, the kid called you on it. And they go, wow. So that's what I'm hoping will happen, as I'm seeing happen, is people will speak out, but also a greater sense of empathy from the larger populace and understanding, in which I think is beginning. You know, I've been saying this, and it's worth repeating. I was raised, you know, with, you know, we used to walk around with these shirts that said, it's a Black thing, you wouldn't understand. And when I was in high school, my religion teacher, Mr. Harper, said, gentlemen, I think you have it wrong. It's not that. It's not a Black thing you wouldn't understand. It's a Black thing. Let me help you understand. And I think that's what we need to be about. So when we do that, we're spreading knowledge, wisdom to everyone. So what people do is they take that understanding back, and dialogue happens. And those people who start to speak out and say, that's the wrong way to address said person. That's the wrong way to speak about said person. And that slowly starts to seep into the consciousness of the people. That's what this movie is about. And I think that's what this movie is doing.
Yeah, that's why they're so vitally important, because, you know, it's one thing to hear about another person's experiences, but to actually walk in their shoes and
Absolutely
empathize with them. You know, I mean, it helps you understand that, you know, we all bleed the same color, and we
absolutely, brother. Absolutely.
Well, Russell, thank you so much, and congratulations on the movie. It's vitally important and very powerful. Thank you for your time.
I appreciate it, Zach. Have a great one.
You too. Thank you so much.